Tonight, on Lurking Moon, we present a collection of 5 unsettling accounts from ordinary people who experienced signs and warnings before their encounters with non-human intelligences. 5 stories, 5 warnings, 5 moments when the unknown seemed to foreshadow the contact to come. Join us on this journey, and you may discover that some of these warning signs have happened to you as well.
People talk about the Marfa lights like they're tourist attraction, like something cute the desert does for visitors. I've driven Highway 90 through Marfa more times than I can count, and I never paid those stories much attention. That changed on a Tuesday night in late October, somewhere between Alpine and Marfa, when every single sound on that highway stopped at once. And I mean stopped, like someone had cut the audio feed to the entire world. I was hauling a refrigerated load westbound, running about 62, nothing unusual. The engine was humming the way it always does, that low diesel growl you stop noticing after the first hour. The radio was on, some AM talk station out of El Paso, more static than signal, but enough noise to keep me company. Crickets and wind were doing their thing outside, normal desert night. Then, somewhere around mile marker 194, it all just quit. It didn't fade or quiet down gradually. It simply quit. The engine was still running. I could feel the vibration through the seat, through the wheel, but I couldn't hear it. The radio display still showed the station frequency, but the static was gone. Complete silence, the kind you don't get anywhere outside a recording studio. I actually reached over and smacked the radio panel twice before it hit me that the problem wasn't the radio. "What in the hell?" I said out loud, just to hear my own voice. I couldn't. That's when the cold moved in. Not through the vents. The cab temperature hadn't changed. It was a cold that came from inside the silence itself, if that makes any sense. I've told this to a few people, and most of them look at me like I'm losing it, but that's the only way I know how to describe it. The silence had a temperature. I eased off the accelerator. I wasn't going to stop. You don't stop alone on a desert highway at 2 in the morning. But I slowed to around 45 and checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me, nothing ahead. Just the headlights cutting into the dark and the white dashes on the asphalt scrolling underneath. Then I saw the light. It appeared maybe a quarter-mile ahead, just above the road surface, pale, the color of old fluorescent lighting, slightly bluish. Nothing about it suggested a vehicle. There was no headlight spread, no height to it, no movement that matched tires on pavement. It was just there, hovering maybe 7 or 8 feet off the ground, perfectly still. The size of it was hard to judge, bigger than a basketball, smaller than a car hood. It didn't pulse or flicker, it just held. I've been driving long haul for 11 years. I've seen wildlife eyes in the dark. I've seen brush fires on hillsides. I've seen heat lightning doing strange things over flat land. This wasn't any of that. This was self-contained light with no visible source, sitting in the middle of Highway 90 like it had every right to be there. "Okay," I said again, still hearing nothing. I kept driving toward it because turning around on a 2-lane in the dark with a loaded trailer isn't as easy as it sounds, and I still half expected it to resolve into something, a stalled vehicle, a flare, a drone some idiot was flying at night. But it didn't resolve. I closed the distance to maybe 200 yards, and the light stayed exactly the same. No detail added itself. It didn't grow or shrink as I approached. And then I realized the road was wrong. I know that stretch of 90. I've driven it in daylight, in rain. I know where the curves are and where the long flats open up. There's a slight bend about a half-mile past mile marker 194 where a ranch road cuts north. It should have been visible by then. It wasn't. The road ahead of me stretched out longer than it should have been, the white dashes going on further than the geometry allowed, like the road had been extended, like something had added distance to it. I gripped the wheel hard and kept my speed steady. The light remained ahead of me at what seemed to be the same distance no matter how far I drove. I covered what had to be at least a mile, and it never got closer. The silence held the whole time. Then, like a switch flipped, the sound came back. Engine roar, radio static, wind, the whole thing at once, and the light was gone. Not faded, gone. I was past the bend, past the ranch road cut-off, exactly where I should have been, the lights of Marfa visible a few miles ahead. I pulled into the Marfa rest stop, sat for 20 minutes, and drank cold coffee. I checked my mirrors a dozen times. I called my dispatcher and told him I'd hit a deer. I know, because I needed an excuse to sit still for a while without explaining what actually happened. I've gone over it 100 times. There's no version of that story where everything adds up to something ordinary. The silence was real. The light was real. The road being longer than it should have been, real. Whatever was out there on Highway 90 that night, it wasn't done when the lights of Marfa appeared. I've driven that stretch twice since then, both times in daylight, and around mile marker 194, I still feel it, that drop in the air, that sense of something just outside what I can see. It's still out there, I'm sure of it.
You work enough overnight shifts in an emergency room, and you stop being surprised by much. Bodies do strange things, people say strange things at 3 in the morning, and after a while you develop a kind of professional detachment that gets you through the shift and home to bed without carrying too much of it with you. I say that because I want to be clear. I don't spook easily, and I don't put weight in dreams. What happened to me in Portland over 3 consecutive nights in February changed both of those things. The first dream came after a double shift. I live on Munjoy Hill, about 6 blocks from the water, in an older house that was converted into apartments sometime in the 90s. 2nd floor, 2 bedrooms, nothing unusual about it. I went to bed around noon on a Thursday and dreamt of a white room. It did not resemble a hospital room. There was no equipment, no fixtures, no doors I could identify. Just 4 white walls and a flat white ceiling with light that had no source. 3 figures stood along the far wall, thin, very tall, and still. I couldn't make out faces or features. They weren't doing anything. They were just standing there, watching me with an attention I could feel without being able to see their eyes. I woke up with my heart going and told myself it was shift residue. You see enough in the ER that your brain processes it sideways sometimes during sleep. I noted it and moved on. The second dream came the following night. Same room, same 3 figures, same sourceless light, but this time one of them had moved closer. Not dramatically closer, maybe a third of the way across the room, but the distance had changed. I woke up at 2:14 a.m., according to my phone, and sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes. I said out loud, which is something I'd never done before, talking to myself in the dark like that, The sound of my own voice helped, a little. The third night is where it stops being a story about bad dreams. I hadn't slept well the previous 2 days, and I went to bed early, around 10. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, because I'll get to that in a moment, but something pulled me out of sleep and my eyes went straight to the window. The bedroom faces east, toward the neighborhood, and there's a street light outside that I know well enough that any change in the light registers. What I saw reflected in the glass was blue. A soft, steady blue light, not flashing, not moving, filling the lower half of the window frame like something outside was producing it from below the sill level where I couldn't see the source directly. I did not move for a long time. The clinical part of my brain started running through explanations. Emergency vehicles staging in the street, but there was no sound, no radio chatter, none of the ambient noise that comes with a parked unit. A neighbor's electronics, possible, but the color was wrong, too even, too broad for a screen. I am trained to assess situations quickly, and I could not assess this one. That alone was enough to frighten me. After what felt like several minutes, I got up and went to the window. The street was empty, without vehicles or people. The light was gone. The neighborhood looked exactly as it always does at night. Parked cars, yellow streetlight, bare February trees. Whatever had been producing that light was no longer there, or had never been visible from a direct angle, only in reflection. I went back to bed and did not sleep again. In the morning, I reached for my watch on the nightstand, an old Seiko my father left me, mechanical wind, keeps near perfect time. It read 47 minutes behind my phone, behind the microwave clock, behind every other clock in the apartment. That watch has never lost more than 2 minutes in 3 years. I wound it, set it, and it has kept perfect time since. Those 47 minutes are simply gone. I called my friend Dana, who works nights at Maine Med with me, and I told her the whole thing. She listened without interrupting, which is not her usual style. "Claire," she said when I finished, "have you been sleeping?" I told her that's not what this is. She didn't push it, but I could hear in her voice that she was filing it under exhaustion and stress. I understand that. I would have done the same thing 6 months ago. But I have run the alternatives enough times that I've stopped finding comfort in them. 3 figures in a white room, 2 nights in a row, followed by an unidentified light source reflected in my window, and 47 minutes that no clock in my apartment can account for. That is not a stress response. That is something that happened. I still sleep in that room. I still work my shifts. But I check the window now before I turn the light off every single night, and I keep the watch on the nightstand where I can see it first thing when I wake up. So far, the time has been right. So far.
Ranchers learn to read animals the way other people read weather. You don't need instruments or forecasts, you just watch, and after enough years the behavior tells you everything. So when my horses refused to cross the south pasture on a clear September evening outside Billings, I didn't dismiss it. I stopped, I watched, and what followed is the reason I'm telling this story at all. I run about 400 acres off Moult Road, east of town toward the Yellowstone River breaks. It's open country, flat in places, rolling in others, and I've worked that land for going on 22 years. My horses know every inch of it. That evening, I was moving 2 of them, Buck and a younger mare named Stella, from the east paddock back to the main barn, a route we've done hundreds of times. They balked at the south pasture gate. This wasn't the sideways startle of a horse reacting to a snake or a sudden noise. They simply stopped and refused to go forward, both of them. Ears up, heads raised, staring toward the northwest corner of the field, where the land dipped slightly before the fence line. I looked where they were looking. The sky above that corner was dark in a way that didn't match the rest of the evening. Not storm dark, the rest of the sky was clear, still holding some light from the west. This was a concentrated darkness, a patch of sky that seemed thicker than the surrounding air, sitting low over the field, maybe 100 feet up. No shape I could name, no sound associated with it, just a section of sky that was wrong. "Easy," I said to Buck, which is what I always say. He didn't move. His eyes were fixed, and his breathing had changed, shallow, fast, the way horses breathe when something has genuinely frightened them. Stella had pressed herself against the gatepost and was trembling through her shoulders. I have seen these animals inhale, in lightning, in the middle of equipment malfunctions loud enough to wake the neighbors. I had never seen them like this. I made the decision most ranchers would make. I turned them around, put them in the east paddock for the night, and went back out to the south pasture alone. That was probably not my best decision. I crossed the gate on foot with a flashlight and walked toward the northwest corner of the field. The grass was dry, late season, and I could hear my own boots through it. The dark patch in the sky had either moved or dissolved. I couldn't locate it anymore once I was inside the field. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. The absence of it felt deliberate, like something that had decided not to be visible. I was about 2/3 of the way across the pasture when it happened. I did not hear a voice the way you hear a person speak. It was more like a thought that arrived in my head that I knew was not mine. Clear, flat, no emotion to it, the way a recorded instruction sounds. It said, "Remain still." 2 words, that was all. I stopped walking immediately, which I cannot entirely explain. It wasn't that I chose to stop so much as stopping simply occurred. I stood in the middle of that dark field for what I estimate was 3 or 4 minutes, not moving, not speaking, my flashlight aimed at the ground. Then whatever it was passed. I cannot else describe it. The air around me changed, some quality of pressure or attention lifted, and I was just a man standing in a field at night. I walked the rest of the way to the northwest corner and put my flashlight on the ground. 3 circular impressions in the soil, each roughly 8 feet across, pressed into the dry grass in a loose triangular arrangement. The grass inside each circle was flattened in a radial pattern outward from the center, the way you'd see if something had pushed straight down from above. The ground inside was compacted. I pressed my boot into it, and it had the give of packed clay. Surrounding ground was normal late-season range soil. I walked the perimeter of each circle twice and found nothing that suggested entry, exit, dragging, equipment, or any ordinary method of formation. I called my neighbor Dale Finch the next morning because he runs cattle on the adjacent property, and I wanted to know if he'd seen anything. He hadn't, but he told me his dogs had been unmanageable all night, barking at the south-facing fence line for hours, which had never happened before. The impressions are still in that corner of the field. I've left them alone. The grass inside hasn't grown back the way it should. It's been weeks now, and the circles are still visible, still compacted, still sitting in that same triangular arrangement. Buck still won't cross the south pasture gate without resistance. Every evening when I bring him in from the east paddock, he slows at that gate and looks northwest, and I have learned not to look with him, because whatever he's watching for, I'm not sure I want to confirm it's still there. I think it is, though. I think it has been there since September, and I think it is patient about whatever it's waiting for.
There's a particular kind of dark that settles over Fairbanks in November that people who've never lived here don't fully understand. By 4 in the afternoon, the light is gone, and what replaces it isn't just night, it's a specific weighted absence that presses down on everything. I mention this because the light I started seeing near the tree line behind my house was something I could not explain away as a reflection or a neighbor's porch lamp. It was the wrong color, the wrong height, and it was there every single evening for 4 days before it did what it did on the last night. I live off Farmers Loop Road, about 3 miles from the university. The back of my property borders a stretch of black spruce that runs north toward the Chena River floodplain, dense, dark tree cover that I've always kept a reasonable distance from after sundown. The first evening I noticed the light, a Monday, I had just come in from scraping my car and happened to look toward the tree line from the back porch. Amber, small, maybe the size of a softball from where I stood, hovering at roughly 8 feet off the ground, just inside the first row of spruce. Steady light, no flicker, no movement. I watched it for about 2 minutes and went inside. I told myself it was a headlamp, someone cutting through the trees on foot. Snowmobilers sometimes come through that corridor in winter, but a headlamp moves, and this one didn't. I checked again from the kitchen window 20 minutes later, and it was gone. I noted it and didn't dwell on it. Tuesday evening, same position, same time, same amber light. I stood on the porch longer this time, maybe 5 minutes, and it didn't move at all. No beam, no spread to the light, just that contained amber glow sitting in the spruce line, like it had been placed there. I called my friend Nora, who lives 2 streets over, and asked if she'd seen anything unusual near the tree line. She hadn't. Wednesday it was back. This time I walked to the edge of my yard, about 30 feet closer than I'd been the previous nights, and looked at it directly. Still the same size, same color, same height. At that distance I should have been able to identify a light source, a lantern, a device, a reflective surface catching something. There was nothing behind it. It was self-contained, originating from no object I could see. I went back inside and locked the door, which I don't normally do until I go to bed. Thursday was the 4th night, and I want to be precise about what happened because I've gone over it enough times that I can account for every detail. The light appeared at its usual position around 4:20 p.m. I watched it from the porch for several minutes, and then I took 3 steps to my left along the porch railing. The light moved, same distance, same direction, tracking my movement with a delay of about 1 second, the way a person turns their head when they notice motion. I stopped. It stopped. I stepped back to my right. It moved right. I stood completely still, and my heart was going in a way I couldn't talk myself out of, because there was no category for what I was watching. This was not a light behaving the way light behaves. Then it began moving toward me, slowly, steadily, drifting out from the tree line and across the open ground between the spruce and my yard. I backed up against the porch door and watched it come. It stopped at the property edge, the low snow fence I put in last winter, and held there. Then it turned, if turning is the right word for something without a body, and moved north along the fence line toward the gap where the gate is. It was showing me the way through.
I cannot explain why I followed it. I am a careful person by both nature and profession, and standing alone in a dark yard in Fairbanks in November, following an unidentified light source into the spruce, is not something I would ever describe as reasonable. But the decision didn't feel like a choice in the normal sense. I put on my coat and boots and went through the gate. The light stayed about 20 feet ahead of me the entire time, moving through the trees along what felt like a deliberate path, avoiding the densest growth. We covered maybe 300 yards before the spruce opened into a clearing I hadn't known was there. A frozen depression in the ground, roughly circular, perhaps 40 feet across. The snow inside it was undisturbed. In the center of the clearing, something was standing. I use the word standing because it was upright and because it occupied space in a way that suggested intention and weight, but it had no features I can describe clearly. A tall, dark, vertical form, motionless, with a quality of density that made the surrounding dark look thin by comparison. Whatever stood there belonged to neither category I could name, animal or person. It occupied that clearing, aware of me, and those are the only two things I can say with certainty. The amber light extinguished. I was in total darkness, in a frozen clearing in the spruce, with something I could no longer see, but could still feel orienting toward me. I turned and ran, and I did not stop until I was inside my house with every light on. I have not gone back to that clearing, but the amber light returned the following Monday, and the Monday after that, appearing at exactly the same position in the tree line at the same time each week. It stays for approximately 20 minutes. It does not move toward the gate anymore. It just waits.
There are things that happen on Lake Superior that never make it into any report, not because people are lying, because they know how it sounds. What happened to me, to Paul Garrett and his brother Derek on that water before sunrise, the 7-minute gap in the GPS log, the boat half a mile from where any of us remember being, that's the kind of thing that ends a guiding career if you talk about it too freely. I'm talking about it anyway. I've been running fishing charters out of Duluth for going on 14 years. I know Superior the way you know a road you've driven 1,000 times, the moods of it, the fog patterns, the way the water changes color when a front is pushing in from the northwest. I launched from the Slip 3 dock at the Duluth Entertainment Convention Center Marina at 4:20 in the morning. Paul and Derek had hired me for a 2-day salmon trip. Both of them were experienced on the water, not the type to spook easy. Paul ran his own small boat on the Wisconsin lakes. Derek had done offshore fishing in the Gulf. We cleared the harbor and headed northeast toward the Stony Point area, running at about 18 knots. The sky was clear, the lake was flat, which Superior almost never is in late September. I remember commenting on it. "She's giving us a gift today," I said, and Paul laughed from the rear seat. By 5:05, we had lines in the water roughly 4 miles out. The GPS unit mounted on the console was logging our position normally. I had it set to track every 60 seconds, the way I always run it on overnight or pre-dawn trips. Everything was routine. We had coffee. Derek caught a small coho and released it. We talked about the shipping lanes, and I pointed out the distant lights of a laker heading toward the Superior entry. Then Derek said something that made me turn around. "What is that above us?" I looked up. There was a ceiling above the boat. That's the only word I have for it. A flat, even blue-white field, maybe 40 feet overhead, covering a circle of sky that extended maybe 100 feet in diameter from edge to edge. It had no texture, it wasn't cloud, it wasn't fog, it was simply there, and it had a faint interior illumination, the kind of light that seems to come from inside a material rather than from a source. The stars were visible around its edge. Whatever it was, it had a defined boundary. None of us said anything for a moment. "Is that?" Paul started. "That's the last thing I remember clearly. The next thing I know, I was standing at the console with both hands on the wheel, and the sky above us was open and dark and completely normal. Paul and Derek were in their seats. Nobody was speaking. The coffee in my cup was cold. I looked at the GPS track log, and there was a gap in the position record starting at 05:14 and resuming at 05:21. 7 minutes. During those 7 minutes, the boat had moved approximately half a mile to the northeast, which would put us just outside the shipping lane boundary. None of us had any memory of the boat moving. The engine was idling when I came back to myself, not running its speed. I asked them both what they remembered. They looked at each other before answering, and that look told me everything. Paul said he remembered seeing the ceiling, and then it was just gone. Derek said the same. Neither of them had any recollection of the interval. The interval left behind no noise, no movement, and no sensation of time passing, just the ceiling above us, and then it wasn't there anymore. I ran a full check of the equipment. The GPS unit was functioning correctly. The gap in the track log was not a malfunction. The device logs even when it loses satellite signal. It just flags the entry. There was no flag. The device had maintained satellite contact throughout. It simply had no position to record during those 7 minutes, as if we hadn't been somewhere that could be located. I've talked to 2 other guides since then, quietly, off the record. One of them had a client report a similar gap on the Wisconsin side of the lake 2 summers earlier. She didn't take it further because the client asked her not to. The other guide hadn't experienced it himself, but told me he'd heard about a commercial fishing crew out of 2 harbors who came back with a 3-hour discrepancy they couldn't explain. Those men never chartered again. I filed nothing official. There's no category on it on any form I've ever seen. I noted the GPS anomaly in my personal trip log and left the cause column blank. What I keep coming back to is the ceiling. All 3 of us saw the same thing. We didn't discuss it before we each described it independently. We said the same word, ceiling, without coordinating. Same color, same shape, same light source that wasn't a source. 3 separate people, flat water, clear sky, and then something above us that shouldn't have been there. And 7 minutes that belonged to something else. Paul sent me a message about 2 weeks after the trip. It just said, "Do you still think about it?" I told him I did. He didn't reply after that. I still run charters on Superior. I still go out before dawn when clients want to, but I look up more than I used to, especially when the water is flat, especially when the lake is giving us a gift.